the idea of biological resources is that, an anxious state is a very nutritionally hungry state. Your body, it's very resource intensive to manage your stress response like that. So they have to have good energy capacity. They have to have the nutritional building blocks in there to, create their neurotransmitters and their hormones to heal. So there's that piece. There's the biological resource piece. And we can get further into it because that's where the nuance is. That's where you and I both do a lot of our work, right? But then there's the skills and the tactics and the tools, right? This is where therapists are amazing. They can help kids think differently and reframe things and just, how do you breathe your way through a panic attack and anticipating their experiences. So kids do need skills and tools and tactics when their body's wired for anxiety.
Welcome to the Soaring Child Podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Now it is time to welcome Jess Sherman to the Soaring Child. Hi, Jess. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. I'm excited to talk.
I am really excited to talk. I've been wanting to get you on the podcast and just geek out on all the things that we geek out, because we definitely believe and follow through on the same methodology. And so I always love to talk to people that share that same methodology. So excited to dive in. And so, everything going on right now. We've just been through the pandemic, and emotions and mental health are at the forefront of everyone's mind right now. And so how are kids doing now in terms of the anxiety? What do you think COVID did for anxiety in kids?
Yeah, they're not okay. They're just not okay. They are not nearly as resilient as we hope that they are. I mean, I don't want to start here. Let's start on a big downer. But, there's this sense of kids are resilient. They'll be fine. They'll just, we'll get through it. They'll roll with the punches. And the statistics, sadly, they're showing us that that's not the case. And with all things mental wellness, I mean, it's been called, it's a national crisis in the US, and I would say globally too. I mean, there's studies out of Italy, there's studies out of the UK, studies out of the US, Canada, to show that, it's just kids are, learning and mood things going on in the classroom is getting worse. And anxiety is getting worse as well. It's up to 30 to 40%, up from about 20%. And some are saying it's, even higher than that. And then in kids that had a previous diagnosis of something mood behavior related, there was a UK study that suggests that 83% of that cohort has experienced worsening symptoms. And then, more the visits to the emerge for suicide, attempted suicide, suspected suicide is way up.
Wow.
It really is a crisis that needs, I mean, it was a crisis before, when you say, 1 in 5 kids prior to COVID had a mood or a learning or a behavior diagnosis. And that's just the diagnosed ones, right? You and I know that a lot more than that. Who haven't been diagnosed with anything, but there are lots of troubling symptoms smoldering. So that was pre-COVID, and now it's up to 30 to 40%. So it's there's a lot. We need to really pay attention to this. Yeah, so sorry to start with the explosion.
No, that's okay. Look, every day I'm hearing one of my friends saying that, their daughter was having panic attacks, or, there's so many stories going on from parents right now. And it's sad. It's really awful. And I think also not only is the, anxiety is higher, I think it's people have become a lot more aware of it as well. And we need to do something. We need to do something collectively about it. And I completely agree with it. And so, I've noticed, in the past, you've worked with kids that have these neurodevelopmental disorders, but I can see you sort of changing track at the moment. And is this one of the reasons, why you are so interested in anxiety specifically now?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I got into this because I was a teacher in high school saying, what the heck is happening? What is going on with kids? Why can one child, be exposed to a quote unquote stressor, like, an exam, for example, and they rise to the expectation and they study and they ask questions and they're exposed to that stress and they actually grow from that stress, or they have a disagreement with a friend and they work it out and they grow and they become, more, confident, resilient. Yeah. After that stress, while another child can completely fall apart and have panic attacks and have anxiety attacks and can't sleep and get constipated and break out in acne and rashes. What is going on with these kids is what I was wondering. Right. And so when I left teaching and I got into nutrition, and that's when, my mind exploded. It was like, oh my gosh, it's about the body. It's about how the body is receiving the stress, and it makes all the difference. And so what are the factors inside the body that make or break that stressful experience? That's what I got really interested in. So when I learned just, recently actually, that the average onset of anxiety is age 6, diagnosed anxiety, I was like, that's not okay. Like,
Not okay.
Anxiety in its essence is, it's a word that we use to describe a feeling of extreme worry and extreme unease, right? What are 6-year-olds having extreme unease about? It's
Who knows?
It's bigger, right? It's like, it's not that they're having any more unease. It's not that they have more to worry about than a 6-year-old 10 years ago. I think, I mean, they do, but at age 6, your perception of stress is what it is. I think it has much more to do with the resilience of their body. And so they're not able to, the way that stress lands on their body is intolerable. And it's turning into what we call an anxiety disorder. It's turning into obsessions. It's turning into tics. It's turning into panic. So there's lots we can do about that, right? As you and I know, like, there's so much we can do to improve the resilience of the body so that when the stressors come, they land differently on that body, on that more resilient body. Yeah. And a child can actually grow from that stress rather than getting crippled by it, dismantled by it.
Yeah, look, definitely with the population that I work with kids with ADHD, a lot of the time that anxiety comes hand in hand. But, as you were saying, is it really anxiety? Is it something else going on in the body? Is it the way that we're living our lives these days? And so I just want to dive a little bit into that, because I think that we could totally geek out on this. And so from your point of view, what do you think it is? And I know it's going to be different for everyone, but let's just dive into some of those things.
It's all of those things. And, one thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is that whole concept of root cause. Because, with functional nutrition and integrative nutrition, there's always this conversation about, like, what's the root cause? And I've started thinking lately that there is no root cause. It's a vicious cyclone kind of situation, more than it is a roots and a branches kind of situation, right? So, and when I start thinking about it that way, that, like, kids are stuck in this vicious cycle of stress, Their biological stress is leading into their psychological stress, which is affecting the environment around them, which is affecting their biology, which is affecting their social skills. Like they're just stuck in this cyclone. And when I think about it that way, I find that really helpful, and helpful for parents too, because it means that we can find a whole lot of entry points, right? There can be any number of entry points when you think of it as cyclical like that. So I like that, because parents sometimes get overwhelmed and they're like, where do I start? And it's like, well, there are a number of places we can start depending on your situation, your bandwidth, your resources, because everything's feeding into everything else.
Yeah. I have to say, I do like that idea of looking at it as that cyclical matter and the entry points. I haven't heard it being explained that way. And I do like that, because where is that entry point? Where did that entry point start? And it could have started in multiple different places for different people. So let's just go into some of those entry points. Let's talk about that. From your perspective, what are some of those entry points?
So from the way I think of it, if we were to construct, like, if I'm thinking, gosh, what do I want anxiety treatment to look like in the future? I think of three really distinct therapeutic considerations. And you could swap anxiety for ADHD, for obsessive compulsive disorder, for any number of
Parkinson's, diabetes,
depression, any number of things. And I think of it this way. So let's just go back to anxiety and let's use that context. We need to make sure that a child has the biological resources that they need. And I borrow that from our mutual friend, Dr. Amy Apigian, who really fleshed this out for me when in the context of trauma, helping kids recover from trauma. This idea of having biological resources, which basically means they have to have, oh God, sorry, there's a mosquito buzzing at me. Sorry.
That's okay.
The idea of biological resources is that, an anxious state is a very nutritionally hungry state. Your body, it's very resource intensive to manage your stress response like that. So they have to have good energy capacity. They have to have the nutritional building blocks in there to create their neurotransmitters and their hormones to heal. So there's that piece. There's the biological resource piece. And we can get further into it because that's where the nuance is. That's where you and I both do a lot of our work, right? But then there's the skills and the tactics and the tools, right? This is where therapists are amazing. They can help kids think differently and reframe things and just, how do you breathe your way through a panic attack, and anticipating their experiences. So kids do need skills and tools and tactics when their body's wired for anxiety.
Yes. And when they're in that fight or flight, because when they're in that fight or flight, they can't react in a way that a normal person would. So I completely agree with you.
Right. They can't access their frontal cortex. So they do need those skills and tactics to bring their nervous system back into a sympathetic state so that they can think rationally. So that's really important. And then there's the third consideration is retraining neural pathways, which is where something like neurofeedback comes in, or frequency work, or somatic work. Just this idea that, when a nervous system is really primed to be in an anxious state and is on like a hair trigger, that when there's a stress response, and then a child will get stuck in that stress response. These kind of retraining systems can really help shift a nervous system back to a different state of being. So these are the three elements. There's the biological piece, the skills and tools and tactics, and then there's the retraining pathways. And I think from what I see, most therapies focus on the skills, tools, and tactics, right? Whether it's coming from an educational perspective or it's coming from a therapist perspective, psychology, psychotherapy, which is all great. But if you're teaching, what I hear from the colleagues that I work with on those things is that it doesn't quite stick until you get that biology piece in place, until you make sure that the body is able to receive all of that stuff and really integrate it into their body.
Yeah. So
right?
Listeners, just take note of that. You know, the therapists, the teachers, they're all saying that some of these other therapies with the tools and the tips and that the body can't receive that input. And I like to say it in terms of the body's in a state of inflammation. When the body's in a state of inflammation, these other tactics, they can't work as well as they should. So we need to reduce that inflammation to allow all of these other amazing tools and strategies to actually be received by that body.
Absolutely. That's exactly a great way to put it. And it's actually a really nice thing for people to consider as they're listening to this. If you've been in therapy for years and years and years, or even a year, and you're just like, yeah, it's helping, but we're in micromanagement mode. We have to constantly remind the kids to use their tactics and everything has to be just right in order for it to work. Then that's a really good sign and signal that there is inflammation in the body and that there's some of these biological pieces that that's your next step.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And I think the listeners out there would have heard me talk about this a little bit, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to bake a pie. And we're trying to bake a really good pie, and there's lots of little ingredients, but if you don't have the base of the pie right, then it's not going to be a very good pie. And from our perspective, both you and me, it is that, as you say, biological. I like that way that you've put it, that biological side of things, the body, you need to feed the body, you need to reduce that inflammation in the body. So that's wonderful. And so let's dive into that biological side of things. What do you think is sort of really going on underneath symptoms of anxiety?
Well, there's 5 things going on. So when I take people through this process, and I know you talk about this all the time as well, and I just want to reiterate it again, that for parents who are listening to this, if you don't have a system to follow, any system, whatever system that makes sense to you, you will get stuck in the vicious cycle that we talked about in the beginning, and you just get swept up in it, and it turns into this big snowball. So the system that I use is a two-pronged thing. We need to, which I think is the same kind of framework that you use, right? Which is we need to nourish and we need to relieve stress.
Mm-hmm.
So the 5 things that I look at, which I have found that, if you're trying to identify the triggers of stress, the source of inflammation that we just talked about, if you look at these 5 areas, you're probably going to find it. So they are nutrient imbalances, their food reactions, their toxicity and poor detoxification capacity. Usually there's a genetic component to that, though not always. Infections and imbalances in the gut ecosystem. So if you pull apart those using your best guesses, using trials or using functional tests, whatever you have resources for, you will find the sources of inflammation that are keeping the nervous system stuck in a sympathetic or a dorsal vagal state, like in a dysregulated state.
That fight or flight,
Fight or flight, or that freeze or fawn kind of state. So when your child is in one of those stress response states, they can't hear you, they can't think logically, they can't access their tools, you're going to see behaviors. They're very predictable behaviors. And if people want, I can link them to my little seminar that I did explaining the nervous system and how it's very predictable. Once you understand the language of the nervous system, you can start to understand why your child is behaving the way they're behaving and why they can't just snap out of it and why you have to say things 10 times and why they can't remember to breathe or remember to, all of the things that you're teaching them. So we can link to that. But that's a child will get stuck in those regulated nervous system states, and they can't learn very well when they're there. They can't poop very well. They're not going to be very hungry, so they're stuck in the snowball.
Yeah.
And we have to break in somewhere.
Totally. And when you see your kid that is melting down, when you see your kid not listening, when you see your kid daydreaming off into another world, like, that's not normal. And that is their body telling you that there's something else going on.
Yeah.
You know, when they're having that meltdown, they're not doing it to annoy you or hurt you. They're doing it because their body is yelling out to you saying, Mom, I'm not okay. Please help me.
Yeah, I think of it as like, I've reached capacity.
Yep. I like that. I've reached capacity.
And kids are brilliant. I mean, one of the things is that you and I both come from this premise that the body is supremely intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
And kids are brilliant in their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so a symptom, a behavioral symptom, any kind of symptom, but here we'll talk about behavior symptoms, is a signal. It's a message. It's a very clear message that they've reached capacity. And when your child reaches capacity in a very, their window of tolerance to stress is tiny, and the littlest thing, like the tag on their shirt or what have you, or something is unpredictable and it throws them into a stress response, then you know that there's some work to do on just bringing down inflammation and finding the stress points that are in one of those 5 categories, sometimes all of those categories.
Yes.
And also that they're in a very nutritionally intensive state.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important for parents to understand, because, we tend to like compare our kids with other kids because that's all we got. It's like, well, that kid can tolerate, a little sugar or gluten or what have you. Maybe, like, why can't my kid?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a bit of a dangerous game to play, right? Because all kids are different. So I would encourage families just to really focus on your kid. If your kid has a hair trigger stress response, they need a heck of a lot of nutrients
mm-hmm.
to just get through their day, right? So it's more important. Well, it's always important, but it's critical that you feed them real whole foods, nourishing, nutritionally dense foods, which brings up the whole picky eating thing, which is maybe another topic for another time.
Definitely a topic for another day. About 70% of the people that we work with have picky eaters, and I'm sure it's the same for you as well, Jess.
It is, but here's the thing, like, I get families who come to me who have been given this advice of like, well, you've got bigger fish to fry, right? Like, it's like, oh, don't worry about the picky eating, just give them a multivitamin. Yeah. And you've got other, let's just focus on the anxiety, or let's focus on the, and it's like, no. We need to make sure that this child is eating real whole foods,
mm-hmm.
or you're not going to get very far. Your multivitamin is not going to cut it. So there's
when they're given, just give them whatever they want. If they want to eat chicken nuggets and fries and a chocolate thick shake, you just need to get those calories in them. No.
Yeah. I hear that all the time as well. And it's like, no, let's actually dig into that. And, I don't want to badmouth anyone. I think when doctors say that, I think they say that because they don't know how to coach someone mm-hmm. into anything other than that. Yeah. So that's fair enough. If it's not your toolbox, why would you suggest something that's outside of your capacity to help them with, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense. But I just, between all of us who are having this conversation now, just let's acknowledge that it is something that needs tackling as part of the bigger picture. I mean, listen, if a kid, I have a trifecta of things that are non-negotiables. If you want to, ease anxiety, ADHD, mood disorders, conduct disorders, depression, your child needs to be eating, sleeping, and pooping.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not, then that's where we start.
Yes. Yep. For sure. 1000%. I couldn't agree with you more, Jess. For sure. And I talk about it all the time. Like, diet is the foundation of everything in the body. And if you don't have a solid foundation, nothing else is going to work the way it's meant to. So you've got to start with that, and the pooping the sleep. It's for sure. So, we have a lot of families that talk about, oh, my kid doesn't sleep. What would you suggest to them if that was the case?
Well, I think of, I think I just think in cyclical means. I'm not a linear thinker. So again, I see this vicious cycle of, they're not sleeping, so they can't manage their hormones. So they're not hungry. So they're not have poor blood sugar. So they're not sleeping. So they have poor hormones and they could just get stuck in here. So again, there's different ways that we can break into that cycle, but it needs to be broken. But just do understand for people listening that it is a vicious cycle. Not just getting them to sleep better, it's figuring out what is their biggest trigger for waking at night or not being able to get to sleep. And where do we start? So I do use melatonin. I know you've talked about that as well, just as a pattern interrupt. To kind of reset things. Sometimes that does the trick. I really like using amino acids to help calm the mind, to help, bring a state of peace to the mind.
So just explain to the listeners out there, what are amino acids?
Yeah, amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So when your body when you eat protein, the process of digestion takes these long protein chains and breaks them up into first chunks, which are called peptides, and then single amino acids, which are the little building blocks. And then the body will take those amino acids and reconstruct them into other things. So you could think of Lego, for example, like first you build a boat and then you take it all apart into single Legos, and then you build a castle into something, you build it into something else. That's
I use exactly the same analogy. It's funny to hear you say that. And I don't normally talk about it out on social media. So that was, I love it.
It's funny. Great minds. They're like, but it is, you're watching your kids. I'm like, oh, look, it's digestion in Lego. But yeah, so one of the things that is reconfigured by these amino acids is the body will take these amino acids and create neurotransmitters, which are chemicals that affect how we feel and function. Serotonin, dopamine. So we can give kids these single amino acids. So we're bypassing the whole process of digestion because they're often not digesting them well. We can give them the amino acids so they have the raw materials, which is giving them, more building blocks, more Legos. And sometimes they will reconfigure those into the neurotransmitters and they will feel better.
So do you want to list out a couple of those amino acids just for the families listening?
Yeah, sure. I find 5-HTP is very helpful. 5-hydroxytryptophan is an amino acid. And that is the building block for serotonin. So when kids have very dark thoughts, obsessive thoughts, everybody hates me kind of thinking, ruminating. If people can Google low serotonin symptoms and just see if it correlates with what you're seeing in your child. 5-HTP can be really helpful, and 5-HTP gets turned into serotonin, and then serotonin gets turned into melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. So when melatonin works really well, sometimes you can back it up and say, well, let's try 5-HTP instead and see if the body can't create its own melatonin with a little bit more building block. And if
I would say to families, though, if your child is on an SSRI, you cannot use 5-HTP. They sort of do the similar thing. And I find that, you're trying to do both of the same. So just be careful. Obviously, starting with any supplements, this is obviously not medical advice. And so you always need to check with your doctor, especially if you are on other medication.
Yeah. And if SSRIs are helping, then it's possible that you could talk to your doctor about weaning off of the SSRIs and onto something like 5-HTP. But yeah, certainly do that with some support. And if 5-HTP is really working well, my next question is, do we need more protein in the diet? And do we need to support the digestion of that protein? So I like to just back it up as far as we can, because ultimately we don't want your child on supplements forever, right? We want the body doing what the body is programmed to do. We want to figure out why why we need these crutches.
Yeah.
But, like when you break a leg, you put a cast on and you give the kid crutches for a while so that they can get through until the leg heals. And then you slowly take the cast away and you slowly take the crutches away. So that's how I use amino acids, just as these pressure valves so that everyone feels a little bit better. They sleep better, they start to reset their hormones. And then, it's almost like you take them from this cascading downward spiral and you shift it into a cascading upward spiral. So they start to feel better and they start to want to feel better. And then, you're off to the races.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good advice. I want to sort of quickly just diverge off there for a bit. I've got a teen, or just going into teen years right now. This is my son, and he's doing great. He's doing great. But look, I have been hearing stories and stories, especially after the pandemic, as I said earlier, about my friends' kids who are all teens. And they're suffering from these panic attacks and these anxiety attacks. And why do you think anxiety hits teens so hard? And why is it, I think I know why it's affecting kids at a younger and younger ages, but why do you think it hits teens so hard?
Well, it's interesting. So the studies around anxiety and specifically have shown that for boys, it tends to have a bit of an earlier onset, especially OCD. And for girls, it seems to hit around puberty. And I mean, I don't know exactly why that is, but I think I love it when families come to me with their sort of 8, 9, 10-year-olds pre-puberty, because I feel like, we know what a resilient biology looks like, and we have great tests to figure out whether, everything's in place. When a child goes through puberty, I call puberty one of life's stress storms. It is a very intense time, biologically, emotionally, socially, right? So it's a time in life when stress load is higher than usual, right? Yeah. From various sources. Pregnancy is another one of those times. Menopause is another one of those times. Certain developmental milestones also another, little mini stress storms. I see them around age 3, age 6, age 9, age 12. And they're just intensive times. So if a child is going into puberty with low resilience, and I often see this, it's like things are kind of okay, they're manageable, but there's some kind of smoldering issues with maybe some late panic or some gut issues, but they're managing. And then boom, puberty hits and they fall apart. So
load on the body. Yeah, so that extra stress on the body just tips them over, really. Is that what you're saying?
But yeah, I think so. I mean, that's how I think of resilience is when stress tolerance matches stress load, then you have a resilient person. But when stress load exceeds stress tolerance, that's when you get symptoms.
Yeah.
So our job is to identify the stress load, bring those things down, using our tools and our tactics and our strategies, but also the biology pieces, finding all of those, food reactions and nutrient imbalances and things like that, gut stuff, and improving stress tolerance at the same time by nourishing the heck out of that child.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I mean, that's what I see happening around puberty.
And so as you mentioned earlier, it's like you've got these kids that are younger and younger and younger. And as you mentioned, age 6 with the average onset, why do you think it's affecting kids that age as much as, when we go into teens or when we go into menopause or at those stress period times?
I wish I had a really good answer for that. I mean, as far as I can tell, there has been some really interesting research around, like pandemic research around how children's response is tied to their caregivers' response. So the more calm, cool, and collected their caregivers have been, the better the kids are faring. And that, I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense because we know that we co-regulate with our kids, and we literally share a nervous system with our kids. It's pretty fascinating how
It is so fascinating. It is just, and when you breathe, if you breathe calmly, your child will breathe calmly. So
listen, we are on a Zoom call, and as you had a breath, I took a breath.
exactly.
How powerful it is.
It is so powerful.
It is so powerful. So we do a lot of that kind of work as people, as I'm working with families. It's like, you can't get inside your child's brain and tinker with it, but if you can relax your own nervous system, you will affect your child's nervous system. And it's funny because it's something I learned years ago as a teacher. I remember talking about co-regulation in teacher college and about how, consider your presence in the classroom and how that is a classroom management tool. And then I kind of forgot all about it, and then was well into my parenting when I was like, oh yeah, family too, right? And then it's interesting to see that come out in the research, in the pandemic research, that I think that one was out of Italy, that there was a strong correlation between how parents were faring with the pandemic, and that included, job loss, economic stress, all of the things, and just their own anxiety, and how that translated onto their kids. So I suppose that could be part of why it's like earlier and earlier and earlier, because we have I don't know how old you are, but we're around the same age, and we, I think, are in a new era of parenting, and we do not have models to follow. Like, our parents were parenting in a different age.
Oh, they were.
Different things to consider, and we have different biology. We have inherited trauma. We have gut issues. We are living in a state as parents where stressors are higher than stress capacity.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, we're passing that on to our kids, which means we have a really important opportunity right now to break that cycle, right? To attend to our own health, to attend to our own nervous systems, our own stress load, our own, looking at those 5 triggers for inflammation, and centering ourselves and making ourselves really healthy. And just by doing that, it will help our kids.
And I was going to ask you what we can learn from this explosion in anxiety, but I think you just answered my question. We can learn that we need to reduce our load on our body, that can then in turn reduce the load on our children's body. Do you have anything to add to that as we finish up?
Well, I would just say that, like, this is not fringy anymore. Like, it's well established that the gut and the brain are connected, for example, and that there's a bidirectional highway of chemicals going back and forth and back and forth. It's well established. It's not, I mean, it depends on what circles you roll in.
And most of these listeners here would have heard me talk a lot about the gut-brain connection, so they're rolling in the circles.
and we've all experienced what low blood sugar feels like, right? It feels that hanger and like that sort of jittery, oh my gosh, I need to eat something feeling. So we all know that food impacts how we feel. So that's not fringy anymore either. We all know that during pregnancy, which is a stress storm, we need more nutrients. So that's not that weird. So it's like we have all these disjointed pieces, but then, you still kind of are looked at like you have 5 heads if you want to take out gluten to improve a mood disorder. For example, it depending again on the circles that you roll in, but yes, we need to reduce our stress load, improve our stress tolerance, and we know a lot about the body and how to do that. So it's doable. It's doable.
And doable.
And by doing it, we are literally shifting the generations that come after us in a positive direction. So it's important work beyond just your own family wellness and your own peace and calm and the success that you want for your kids, which is really important. it goes way beyond that. As you do this work for your kids, you are affecting their kids and their kids' kids and their kids' kids' kids.
I think that we'll end there. That is a very, very good way to sum it up. What you're doing now for your children is affecting generations. And so if you make the right choices now, just think about their kids and their kids and their kids. Jess, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today, sharing your knowledge and experience with all of our listeners. I think you might be frozen on the screen. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
Awesome. Yeah. My home base is my name, jesssherman.com, 3 S's in a row. And you can get to everywhere from there. On Instagram, I'm jess.sherman_raising resilience, which is the name of my book, Raising Resilience. And you can follow the links from there. There's lots of resources and just ways to get started and
fantastic. We will definitely drop those links as well in the show notes. Jess, thank you once again for joining me today. This was a super fun conversation. And I think that it could have gone on and on and on and on. So I'll definitely think that I've got to have you back to chat again. But thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you so much. And thanks for helping parents unpack this, because it's such a stressful place to be for the parents to watch your kids struggle, as you know, right? So
yep. Right back at you.
There is so much you can do. So thank you for initiating the conversation, Dana.
You're more than welcome. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.